both my parents were immigrants. They escaped Czechoslovakia. I grew up with that kind of mindset of the immigrant, this is America, the land of opportunity and freedom. And so I applied to Apple, Sony, and General Magic. I ended up getting offers from each of them. In Silicon Valley, you have these massive egos that go along with the talent. And I was finding this talent in New Zealand that was scrappier. Again, my type of talent, like scrappy talent. We wanted to have that travel experience, but we fell madly in love with New Zealand. It was peer-to-peer learning, so it was like a video platform. It's basically, the kids use it now, YouTube, this way, because I'd worked with QuickBooks and I'd worked with MYOB, and both of them were a nightmare. And they were like, it's an accounting system. I'm like, so you just want to build a knockoff accounting system like everyone else has?
This is Mark Pavlyukovskyy, and welcome to the TechMates podcast, where my partner Hendrik and I explore how Kiwi and Aussie founders are reshaping the future and what sets them apart. Hendrik and I have been part of successful companies in Silicon Valley and Europe, and now bring that expertise to partner with entrepreneurs in Australasia. By sharing the personal stories of successful Kiwi and Aussie founders and how they got here, we hope to inspire you to dream big. This is TechMates, bringing an outsider's perspective to the stories of those daring to disrupt down under. Let's dive in.
Cool. Philip, Thank you so much for joining us in TechMates.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so you had a very long and notable career in tech in the US and also in New Zealand. Yeah, could we just maybe start with where you're born, your upbringing, where you grew up, what those early kind of experiences were like for you?
Yeah, so I grew up in the States, just outside of Philadelphia, in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And had a, kind of a normal suburban upbringing, although actually, not that normal in some ways. So both my parents were immigrants. They escaped Czechoslovakia. And so that was quite a unique perspective on the world. And then, my dad and my mom ran an animation studio out of our house. So, I was surrounded by kind of creative people and creative energy and creative projects all the time. And I'd say also entrepreneurialism that, my parents were running this business. And so I'm sure that influenced me pretty heavily.
Makes sense. Well, wow. I didn't realize your parents escaped Czechoslovakia. That was during that revolution, right? There was a small kind of uprising at the time.
It was when they left right before the Russians invaded in 1968.
Wow. What was that? How did that shape them and what they taught you? And were there any kind of like lessons you had growing up that they sort of like, made sure you understood and learned?
Yeah. I definitely understood a lot about totalitarianism and authoritarianism. So it's pretty terrifying what I'm seeing happening in the US now. And so my dad, interestingly, was born in Japan. His parents were diplomats, and so he was born in Japan. And then during the war, he lived in the US. And so he really grew up American. And then when the war ended, he was shipped back to Czechoslovakia and was actually a fish out of water there, was a real misfit. And his family, so I read this actually much later in life. I read Madeleine Albright's memoir, and weirdly, my family history came up in her memoir. She did a whole doctorate on my great uncle, and he was the prime minister that Stalin installed him. And so, my dad was kind of the black sheep of the family because he grew up with American values, and you knew what freedom was, and freedom of speech and freedom to vote. And so, I grew up with that kind of mindset of the immigrant, this is America, the land of opportunity and freedom, and the kind of democracy, the example of democracy around the world. And then, I think that's immigrant scrappiness of, that you have to figure out how to make your way in the world, and having that kind of relentless perseverance but also a vision to really make something interesting, do something that has an impact, also is definitely ingrained in me.
Makes sense. So he was a diplomat, and then he escaped and started an animation studio.
His father was a diplomat. So his family, they were all in politics. And so again, he was the black sheep, that he was the creative one. And they were like, what are you doing? This is, we don't understand this. And again, so that whole, being immersed in that creative world absolutely, rubbed off on me as well. Just being, that was not taking creative path wasn't not, like for many people, it's discouraged. It's like, whoa, what are you going to do with that? How are you going to make money? And in my world, in my family, that was kind of, not an expectation necessarily, but this is a very viable, way to build a career and to have a really interesting life, a lot more interesting than a lot of other careers. So that definitely appealed to me. It's funny, it's fascinating to me. Weird tangent here, but I lived in Italy for a little bit, and I met this girl from Croatia who did a palm reading of mine. And she said, "Oh, you're going to be very successful in business." And I was like, "Business? I'm a creative guy. I don't have anything to do with business." And so that is fascinating.
What were the creative things you got into as a teenager?
Yeah, so there were a few things. I always loved film. I was surrounded by film, and so that was kind of an early obvious thing. Our basement was a recording studio, and so I played the drums, and so that was another opportunity and interest of mine. And then, but around the time I was 12 or thereabouts, like 10, 11, 12, we used to go to Radio Shack a lot because we'd buy, cables and gear, and they all of a sudden started having computers on display, and I was like, "Oh, what the hell is this? This is amazing! These things, like, wow, what are these things?" And so I got really, really fascinated by computers, and just kind of transfixed with the technology and the gadgetry and all that. I wanted to understand how to make these things. What do you do with these things? And so then I found out that you can program them, and so at the time, the only way to learn how to do that was to I went to the library, the local library, and took out a book on programming languages. And then I learned that BASIC is this, this entry-level programming language, and eventually, convinced my dad, I really wanted desperately a computer. My dad was like, no, it's just like, you're not serious about this and all that. And I was like, I'm getting all these books. I'm learning to program on scraps of paper. And so he ended up getting a little... a Radio Shack calculator sized computer that you could actually program in BASIC.
Wow.
And it was, tiny little keyboard. You were really just, pushing tiny little buttons. But I did some, early programming on that. And I think that really convinced him. And so then we ended up getting one of their earliest personal computers. It was a clone of an Apple II, and that was made locally in the Philadelphia area, called a Franklin Ace. That, I just became really obsessed with learning how to code and programming, and just being able to control this computer, and create things from nothing was just an absolute mesmerizing power, superpower. It felt like.
What kinds of things would you create, or what would you want to code?
I did some like basic games, and I did some basic. At the time there was this thing called Beagle Brothers, which was like a mail, you get it in the mail, and it would be this like poster sized thing for, how to hack into your computer and do all kinds of things and make it do. So a lot of it was just kind of noodling about, but then definitely games were a key thing. And then eventually I actually ended up making a contact database, basically a CRM for my dad and my mom. I thought that they had this Rolodex. Yeah, Beagle Brothers. That's it. Yeah. That was, an amazing resource at the time, and super fun. And so, yeah, I made the CRM kind of thing for my parents' business.
Oh, interesting. On your basic computer, and they used it? Sorry.
Yeah, industrial design. Yeah, it was interesting. As soon as I finished the CRM thing, all of a sudden I was like getting to be a teenager, and I was like, oh, this is, not so cool to be a computer nerd. And then music was starting to take over my life, and cars were taking over my life. And, I was kind of, the prospect of going to university was suddenly on the horizon. I was starting to panic, and what am I going to do? And, a lot of the kids around me and friends were like, business school. I was like, what the hell is that? I don't even know. I was like, so you're just going to study business, like no particular business at all, just business. And it seemed really aimless and boring to me. And because I was into cars at the time, all of a sudden I just got obsessed with the design of cars. And so dashboards, I really wanted to, like, again, controls. I love being able to interface. So at the time I didn't have the words for this, but like, how do I interact? How do I interface with this machine? And that became something that I really got fascinated by. And again, it was sort of like computers. I'd go out and get books about, what do car designers do? How do you become a car designer? And that's actually how I ended up in Italy.
Was that during university or before or after?
It was before. So I took a gap year. And because, again, I was in this place where I was like, I'm not sure exactly what I want to study and where I want to study. And so Italy, at the time was the world epicenter of car design. And so I figured, I'll go there and see what I could learn and just be immersed in that world. And I ended up not really getting immersed in the car. I ended up in quite a different part of Italy, and the people I was around they were artists. So I was staying at an artist's residence, and I was painting frescoes and bottling wine, and it was a very romantic, very thrilling kind of. It was much better than going to university, I'll tell you that. And it did. It was great. It was great to have that before university, and then all of a sudden be like, okay, this was fun. Now I'm ready to get serious. Now, and it was great to be able to I've been out in the world. There's a bigger world, I understand now. And it's not just this kind of little microcosm of, high school. When you're at that age, you think high school is all there is. And it's just, there's not much beyond that. And then you go out and you travel and you see, oh my God, it's just so much opportunity, so much variety, so much, so many different ways to see the world and do things in the world. And so, yeah, I definitely, I encouraged my kids to take a gap year. I think a gap year should be mandatory. In most cases,
cool.
Not all cases.
Wow. And that's where you met the Croatian palm reader.
Yes.
Who told you that you're going to do well in business? Your career is going to be interesting. Yeah. Okay. So then what did you decide when you did a year in Italy, you came back?
Yeah. And then I studied industrial design. So industrial design at the time, industrial design is product design, but hardware. Mm-hmm. And so, it was kind of, again, gravitated to that idea of designing car dashboards. But quickly, again, was just still doing my brother became a programmer, got obsessed about computers. And then all of a sudden he had a Mac now. And all of a sudden, then he bought a modem. He bought one of the earliest modems. And it was like, holy shit, this other world of it's really advanced since I was involved in it. And all of a sudden now I can do really much more interesting things with this technology. And so one of the projects we had at university was to design a toy for a toy company called Tyco. And so my partner and I, you had to find a partner to work on this project with. And she and I came up with this concept for, I think they had what is that thing called? The Viewmaster was one of the toys that they owned. And so we wanted to kind of expand that opportunity, that franchise. And so we made this plush toy. So it was a little monkey, and you put the Viewmaster inside the monkey. And so the idea was that you're looking into the eyes, looking into the world of this animal. And so it's, sort of VR was emerging at the time, and we kind of thought of interesting ways that we could expand that into a kind of a VR experience. But we started off with this just basic Viewmaster looking into the eyes of this animal. And we won that. There was a competition, and we won that competition. And a key part of the project was you had to make a TVC for it, a TV commercial. And, again, video cameras were these big hulking VHS things that you'd carry around, and everyone's video were just these shaky videos. And my brother was working with an early version of Director. It wasn't even called Director. It was whatever it was called before Director, and an early version of Photoshop. And I saw him working with these tools, again, teaching my dad, these are animation tools. All of a sudden, I was like, I want to incorporate that. I can make a TV commercial with these tools. These are amazing tools. And so we made this really nice commercial that really, and so it was an interesting, it was like prototyping and it was like a pitch. It was very much like a pitch. And so, yeah, that was all of a sudden it got me looped back into computers. And then all of a sudden, every project I did somehow had an element of working with computers and being online was, as soon as I got that experience of working with a modem, I remember, so the next project we had at university was to dream up what is going to happen. It was called the Futures Project, and you had to kind of dream up what's going to happen in 10 years time. And one of the projects I mentioned VR was kind of the emerging technology, and everyone was trying to think of how are we going to do VR. And I was like, oh, we're going to shoot lasers into our eyes. And, that's, because no, we're not going to wear these stupid headsets. And I still stand by that. It's proven out. And so I felt like that I just wasn't interested in that technology, actually. And I wanted to do something that I felt was more tangible. And like I said, I was traveling through Italy a lot. And so I actually ended up designing a mobile device, and actually designed 2 mobile devices. And so that's on my Skyrise site. If you go to Skyrise, you'll see there's a photo of this idea. I had a tablet-sized device and a phone device that was a touch phone. And if you go to the General Magic page at the very bottom, there's a photo of this project I did. And so scroll up. General Magic is right in the middle of the page.
This one?
No. It's text. I'll go down.
Oh, sorry.
Yep, there we go. And scroll all the way down. So that is what was remaining. I found it up in my dad's many, many years later. And so you can see a tablet device and what's left of this kind of idea of a phone device. And the idea was I wanted to have maps to go around traveling the world. And I want to be able to shoot video and audio and photos. And I wanted to be able to contact people, obviously. And so that project ended up getting me this internship at General Magic.
Wow.
And so there were a couple companies at the time that I really wanted to work with. Apple was top of the list. Sony was also very, very high on the list. They were kind of the consumer electronics giant, and everyone, they were doing amazing design work. But Apple was doing amazing things with computers. And then there was this weird stealth company called General Magic that I read about at the back of some magazine. And they were in stealth mode. But it was all the original engineers from the Mac team were working on this mobile device. And that was the rumor. There was no official information about it. And so I applied to Apple, Sony, and General Magic. I ended up getting offers from each of them, and I decided General Magic was, I was familiar with this, like I was already in the headspace. To me, it was the most interesting, the most compelling thing. And to be able to work with the original Mac team was, and to move to California. So that's how I ended up moving to California and working in Silicon Valley. And
so did you just send your application to them? Did you just send this project to them and applied for an internship?
Yeah, so part of this project, we had to do a brochure for it, and I wish I had the brochure. I'd love to know what I'd written and, the design of it, looking back on it today. But I remember the cover of the brochure had a Marvin Minsky quote on it, which was something to the effect of, you don't know the world until you've seen it in multiple ways. And that was the kind of the theme of this device, is getting to see the world and experience the world in multimedia. So, the emerging term at the time was multimedia. And so I sent them that brochure, and they made me an offer, and I came out. So I got to work with not only the original Macintosh team, who were these absolute, heroes and legends, but then also this new generation of, both designers and engineers and, marketing people and business people. And so Megan Smith hired me, and she's gone on to at one point she was the CTO of the United States I think it was under Obama.
Wow.
And then Tony Fidel, who you might have met actually.
We met on the trip. Yeah.
So he wasn't at dinner, unfortunately. I would have loved to catch up with him. So he was one of the engineers, the hardware engineers at General Magic. And he actually mentions it, pretty extensively in his book, Build. And so if you haven't read his book, it's absolutely amazing. It's one of the, I generally don't like business books, but that definitely is one that I, would highly recommend. And so really great. He explains the story really, really well in that book. And so there were all these other people that went on to found all kinds of, new companies, the new era of Silicon Valley. So that was an absolutely incredible experience. But what was interesting about it to me was it was the first time I experienced user testing. And so that was the first thing they had me do when I walked in the door, pretty much. And they said, all right, we have this, platform, and we want to get, users. We're doing all kinds of user testing, sat down with it, and I was just livid and cursing and just hated it. Absolutely. It was just, I couldn't say anything nice about it.
Why?
And it was insanely slow. And it used this metaphor of a main street. So, you had to get to your address book, you had to walk down a road, actually navigate. And again, this is very, very slow computing power. And, you're watching it refresh and they're like, oh, it'll get faster. And it's like, I don't care if it gets faster. You're making me click about 10 times to get to my address book. And it's all this, again, they overdid the metaphor concept from Apple. Skeuomorphic, talk about skeuomorphic. Everything was just, again, I think they were just borrowing too much from this idea of virtual worlds and making it more, user friendly or consumer friendly. So I think that was the fundamental idea. It's like, this is for consumers. Your grandma should be able to use this device. And it's like, no, just not flying. And interestingly, General Magic was a fascinating conglomerate of both consumer electronics. So I ended up actually, Sony was part of, the I forget what they call it, but whatever, the conglomerate that they put together. So it was Apple, Sony, AT&T, Philips, and maybe another one or two. So the Sony team were actually on site quite a bit, where the rest, Motorola was another one. And the Sony team were there the most, and I got to, spend time with them. And I said to them, look, this is terrible what they're building here. You guys made the Walkman. That's what I'm here for. This is my futures project was, I wanted to have, instead of carrying around cassette tapes with me everywhere, I want to be able to have access to any song, anytime, anywhere. And I knew, because I'd had a modem at that point, I already knew that, we'll be able to do these things. And we have cell phones. So put the two together, a modem and a cell phone, all of a sudden we can go around and do everything wirelessly.
Yeah.
And the Sony team were just like, cute kid, just kind of ignored me. So yeah, it was a really interesting experience to be surrounded by, a room full of the most talented people, on the planet at the time, doing some of the most interesting work, groundbreaking work. And so there's a documentary about it, General Magic, the documentary, which I highly, highly recommend people watch. And it talks about their downfall. And yeah. And so, yeah, I learned a hell of a lot from that experience. And that was a really great experience. And then, went on to found my own company after that.
Yeah. And you did. So what were learnings personally for you? Kind of what did you take away? And this company that you founded, it was what I understand, a consulting business. I was working with a lot of the top brands and Beastie Boys and Apple. What were the learnings from that experience? And then how did you translate it into what you did next?
Yeah, from General Magic was, again, you can have all the talent in the world, but if, that actually can be a real distraction. That can be a real, you can fool yourself into thinking that you're infallible. The hubris and the egos that go along with that are pretty large. And so that was definitely something to be, doesn't matter what you've done in the past, and doesn't matter if you build this amazing team, you still have to build an amazing product and an amazing strategy. And I didn't have any doubt that the technology was going to happen, that this was all going to happen. That was 100% guaranteed. But I was also convinced that the way they were going about it was, I struggled to see how that was going to happen. And so I think, another big takeaway for me was that was, General Magic was a bunch of, and
a lot of what?
It was a cube farm. So it was like a corporate office in Mountain View. And it just, even though they were, the renegades of Silicon Valley, and that they didn't wear, suits, and they just wear, sneakers and shorts and T-shirts. And so that was kind of their rebellion. It still, to me, was a corporate environment. And that's where, I was, a young kid, 21, however old I was. And I was like, nah, fuck that. I actually want to have fun here. And I think that we can do this a different way. We can do this, in a much more interesting, much more fun, much more street level way of approaching this. And so that's, I think, interestingly that, now that I say that out loud, there are some kind of echoes of that from my experience going from Xero to Upstock, that, Xero was kind of this big, kind of traditional startup in a lot of ways. It was, it was also unconventional in many, many ways. But in terms of like kind of the scale and the roadmap for scaling, it was by the book. And well, again, sorry, not exactly, but when we started Upstock, we were like, we want to go about this in a different way and a more kind of human level, more human scale. And that was what we did with the business I founded, Turntable. And so, yeah, our first client was the Beastie Boys. So I did a prototype.
How did you win them?
Again, again, my approach has always been like, what do I ultimately want to do? What is like the best thing that I, start from the top, the ultimate dream come true? What would that be? And so it was definitely Beastie Boys and doing things with music, again, an extension of that device that I designed. One of the alternative ideas that I had was, rather than doing this like, mobile device, was a stereo that could, again, bring down, download all the music, but not only that it had artificial intelligence. So it could pick songs for you. It could say like, oh, you like this? And not based on like, here's what other people like, but it's based on analyzing the beats, analyzing the music patterns. Music is just patterns. So it seems very, very algorithmic. We'll find you all this other music that you're going to like because it fits your taste. And so, I kept exploring that, how do we apply music and technology? And there was a record label in San Francisco called Ubiquity, and they had a DJ night. They had a record shop called Groove Merchant, and they also had a DJ night called Groove Merchant. And so I was there all the time, both at the record shop and at the bar. I put together a prototype to pitch them on the idea of like, hey, let's make your record label go online. And again, online there was no, like AOL was just emerging and was this kind of, again, fringe. It wasn't even at peak AOL. It was still early days for AOL. And so bulletin boards were kind of the dominant technology and things like that. And so I wanted to do something really visual. And I knew that this is all going to go visual, that this is not going to be like text. And so I put together a prototype. And again, that's on the Skyrise site. If you go to the Beastie Boys project, again, at the bottom, it shows you kind of the original prototype for the Groove Merchant. So if you go all the way down, no, maybe it's actually up at the top this time. You keep going all the way at the top. There it is. So this is the Groove Merchant demo. And so it shows a online music store, an idea, a concept for an online music store. And so you get into it, and then you have your different genres of music. And you then can go, and this is the days of CDs. So you go into the catalog and you see a bunch of CDs. Wow. And then you pick a CD and you can listen to the song, so you can sample it, all online instantly. And then you can buy it. So you see that credit card icon there. And This is before e-commerce. There was no e-commerce. It did not exist. And so I pitched this to Ubiquity, and they were like, yeah, this is amazing, but we're a scrappy little record company. We don't have any money to fund something like this. And I went around then next to the record labels, and I met with all the record labels, and they all said to me, we don't do computers. We do, we sell product, physical goods. And they really, they really did not understand it.
So, why is this video shaking? Are you like holding a camera on a?
Yes. So this is actually me. I think this is a very early iPhone, and I'm just shooting it off like the remnants. This laptop was, I don't know, 10, 15 years old at the time. So it was on its last legs, and was just, wanted to make sure I captured it for posterity.
So cool.
And so, yeah, the record companies weren't interested. And then all of a sudden there was this thing there was a, what's it called? A bulletin board for the Beastie Boys. And on there, somebody mentioned that there's, a website, but Mosaic had just emerged. And so Mosaic was the first web browser. And again, it was just, there was probably about 10 websites on the internet at the time. And the Beastie Boys, some kid made a Beastie Boys fan site for them. Mm-hmm. And so that, that was one of the first websites I ever went to. And so I emailed the kid who did the site, hey, I'd love to, here's a prototype of the Groove Merchant. I'd love to do something like this with the Beastie Boys. Mm. And he called me back immediately. Like he interrupted my modem dropped out all of a sudden because you had to be on the phone. You're using the phone or you're on the computer, one or the other. You couldn't do both at the same time. Uh-huh. And he said, yeah, do you have anything, that you can send me? And I sent him this Groove Merchant prototype. And, they were amazed by it. And so that got the ball rolling. And so, that's how the Beastie Boys became my first customer, my first client. And so this was, revolutionary. That VR is one of the first implementations of VR. And so that was QuickTime. The Apple team had built that. And we'd done some work with Apple already at that point. Oh, no.
So what you had in the VR, you could click on the picture of the album and then that would...
Yeah.
Shit, that's so
that's their studio. So we got to do this, nobody had ever done a shoot like this before. So we hired a film crew and, took the panoramic photos of the studio and had to stitch them together. So we were, kind of inventing all this technology, and full screen video like this had never been seen before. So we were working, we had good relationships with the QuickTime team at Apple. And so once we landed this project, then all of a sudden they were just like, we were working kind of really tightly with the QuickTime team. And so we got access to all this technology that nobody else had access to. And we were pushing the boundaries. We were doing things that, even the QuickTime team hadn't ever thought of or done before. And so it was interesting. So there's two interfaces here. There's the studio. Mm-hmm. Then we built a conventional sort of menu driven where you can scroll the New York subway map to find all the things. So you can see the full catalog of all the content.
Yeah.
And so in a lot of ways, this was a precursor to the internet, to YouTube.
And this came on a CD.
Yeah, this came on a CD.
So everything there was locally on the CD, right? There was nothing that actually connected to the internet?
It did actually connect to the internet. So, but that wasn't kind of a major function of it. We reached out to Netscape, who were by now they were Netscape was really big, or it was emerging as this kind of big company, and they were absolute dickheads to us and were, trying to charge us a fortune. They wanted a royalty on it and, massive points on it. And the Beastie Boys wasn't going to give them that. We weren't going to give them that. And then Microsoft just launched their first Internet Explorer, and they were like, we'd love to, here for free. It will cost you nothing. Put it on the disk. And so, so we linked off to the Beastie Boys website you can see there's an e-commerce idea in here where you can buy their merch. So you can buy there you go. So the idea was, and we wanted to link it directly to the website so that you could, and they were like, no, it's too complicated for our team. Just put the phone number on there. So we just put the phone number.
So they would call. So they'd get on this thing, they'd pick a shirt and they'd call to order the shirt?
Yeah. And we wanted to make it fully digital, so it's all, online, but they weren't up for that. So that this was, this kind of really was groundbreaking in many, many ways. And so this is a full, a playlist, and you can just watch the videos back to back. It's like 40 minutes of video or something like that. Again, unheard of. Nobody had done anything.
Oh, you could change the playlist?
Yes. Drag and drop was unheard of at the time. There was just all this.
That's some insane innovation in there.
Yeah. It was. So it was cool. Incredible.
And you build this as just like a custom, one-off project for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was all done in Director with QuickTime. And again, we had a really great relationship with Macromedia, who built Director. And so we were really pushing the boundaries for them. And, so that, again, they were feeding us all kinds of technology, and we were kind of in their labs, like we were at Apple with QuickTime, in their labs, and just kind of pushing their boundaries. Hey, we want to do this. Can you, add some functionality to do certain things?
What was the reception of this thing? People just like blown away by like what was possible here?
Yeah. So it really made, a huge impact, but, and so there's more lessons here. And so this is a VR. So you can we made audio VR. So you can pan, they gave us multi-tracks.
Huh.
So as you pan the scene,
you hear it differently?
Add rock and you're just getting the guitar. Then you pan over the drums, you're getting the drums. And that was, we asked the QuickTime VR team to enable that technology for us.
Philip, who was coming up with all these ideas? Like, and who was implementing? Because it's a lot of tech you had to build from scratch, right?
Yeah. It was all
This was your agency. Like you built an agency.
Yes.
You hired some engineers. This is in California.
So my brother, my brother and I formed a business, and we did, basically 95% of the work on this. So I was the creative. I designed it all, and that was a combination of designing the actual pixels, but also designing the user interface, the interaction design, and also the concepts behind most of it. And so my brother was basically the engineer, but he had a lot of ideas, like that audio panning was totally his idea. And
but like when you told him all this stuff, did he like not push back and say, "Hey, this is not possible"?
Who? Oh, my brother?
Yeah.
Yes, he sure did. And so this was this was a learning lesson. I had enough capability. So that Groove Merchant prototype, I programmed that all myself.
Okay.
So I had enough capability, engineering to be dangerous and to be able to say, look, I have an idea how we could do this. And so, I could push my brother and say, let's find a creative way to do this. What if we did this? What if we did that? And so, that stuck with me throughout my career. Like, I always strongly advocated and recommended to any designer, you should know how to code. It just gives you superpowers. And that's with Xero and, with Upstock, I basically only hired designers that knew how to code. If they didn't know how to, because it's a systems thinking, it's a very holistic, you're not just looking at pixels, you're looking at how does everything work together and what's the vision behind this? What's the user experience behind this? So, there was a lot of lessons there. So this went on tour with them on I think the Stereophonic tour, which was after Ill Communication came out. And so we had these, if you scroll right up to the top at the very header of the page, see that Space Invaders? So we got Space Invader shells, arcade, and we swapped out the monitors for computer monitors, and we put a joystick on it so you can navigate the whole thing with a joystick. That went on tour with them as well.
Wow. And so people could play around with the CD, with the content, with the videos, with the music, the VR on a Space Invaders like machine, repurposed. It's insane. So wow. So what were the lessons from that? You pushed the boundaries in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So, I'd say the key lessons are, to dream that ultimate dream. Like, what is it that you ultimately want to do? And it's all achievable. It's, it's always boggled me that people start from the bottom and move their way up. And, I in terms of like building things, I'll iterate my way from kind of the building blocks. But in terms of where I ultimately want to go, that's my starting point. And so we did the same thing with Xero. Like, what is the ultimate solution? And let's work backwards from that. And then, similarly with Upstock. And then prototyping was another huge lesson out of this, that you can fake it till you make it was kind of my motto. It's just you fake it and then you figure out how to do it. And so that's most of the things, I built that Groove Merchant prototype and I was just faking it. And so people would think it was real. They thought this is we're dialing out to the internet and buying, music and listening to music. But if you create that vision, if you can get people into that headspace, first of all, it's so much easier to get people to buy into the idea, the concept. And then it's all doable. So if you can make a fake version of it, chances are pretty high that you can make a real version of it. And it gives you that confidence to do it, and then it gives you a bit of a path to how you would do it.
Because back in the day, there wasn't, the Lean Startup book kind of came out, I guess, in the early 2000s or whatever, but you kind of pretty much did that already in the 90s. How did you learn that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was instinct, and just that scrap. Actually, and this is how the real motivation for that came from going to Macworld. So Macworld was this big expo Macintosh conference. And one of the sessions there was the QuickTime team QuickTime didn't exist. And they were showing, this was the launch of QuickTime at this event. And the QuickTime team showed how they prototyped it. So they used Director to build a prototype of QuickTime. And that absolutely, that I'd say that pretty much defined my whole career. That being in that room, that one event, that 1 hour of my time, of my life, changed the whole trajectory of my life. So
why?
Because all of it was a mystery to me how software was made. And I thought you had to be an engineer and you had to code things and it had to be, properly done. And, there's only you have to kind of manufacture it. And then to realize, no, you can do it scrappy. You can be really, really scrappy and sketch out the idea. And the interesting thing is, it also borrowed lessons from my father, because all this video stuff was, Director was keyframes. Mm-hmm. And so it was things on a timeline. So keyframes on a timeline. And then later Flash was exactly. So I kept coming back to my roots and my history. And then, combining video and music and, that I'm editing and all these things that I kind of grew up with, all these ideas were all converging together and coding on top of it. So it was all the things that I cared deeply about and loved. And, but yeah, that witnessing the team, and that gave me I was like, I can do that. I know exactly. They showed how they did it. And I was like, I can absolutely do that. Mm-hmm. And that just sent me on my way and was the real breakthrough for me.
That's cool. That's awesome. Okay. Well, let's fast forward. So your learnings from that were that you basically just need to start with the final vision of what you want, and then you'll somehow get there. And it's fine to throw together a quick kind of, prototype that maybe doesn't actually fully work, but just to get the idea across, because then you can figure it out. Hiring designers who know how to code, because systematic thinking, you can then translate that into real things. Okay. And then any other parts of that whole kind of, the period of your life that you think is interesting, that you had really good lessons?
Well, so yeah, that kind of segues into the next part, which is the internet was becoming a real platform. It was going from, coding simple HTML and basic websites to actually building. It wasn't yet at the point of building software on the internet so much, but building complex websites was starting to emerge. At that point, our agency that my brother and I had was just basically the two of us, and we would hire contractors as needed. So it was like a little mini production studio. And I was starting to hit a ceiling with the level of projects that I wanted to work on. So there was only a certain scale of project that we could produce. And so we weren't able to build these big complex websites that were programmatic. And so that was frustrating me.
And you were working with your brother this whole time?
At that point, actually, my brother started traveling to South America and to Mexico. So he was one of the original remote workers and road warriors. And so it was getting a bit challenging to we didn't have broadband at the time. And reaching him, we didn't have cell phones that would, cover locations like that. So, kind of relying on him became harder and harder. So I actually bought him out. And then hired some other people to collaborate with. And I did explore building a big agency, but I just had a kid, and that felt like a bit daunting to, do both. And so a couple things happened after we had our son. The Bay Area was starting to be like not so fun anymore. It used to be really creative. Like it was just... in those days when we did the Beastie Boys project and those early projects, we were doing them because we loved it and we were passionate about it, and we were really interested in what you could do and how much fun you could have with it. And then, as the .com bubble started building, then it just became about money. It was just money, 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 money. It was all about money. And the Bay Area became stupidly expensive, and it just became not fun. And it was less creative driven and just more money driven. And, having a kid all of a sudden changed my whole worldview of my values. And suddenly that kind of American capitalism was a value that I struggled with. It's not that I struggle with capitalism, it's the American form of capitalism that I've struggled with. And
how's that different from other forms?
Well, I mean, it's a good question. So I think in New Zealand, for instance, when we moved here, I never heard the word egalitarian in my life until I moved to New Zealand. And I didn't know what it meant. And so it basically meant that there's kind of this level playing field. There's an equity in the way that society is structured and a fairness to the way that it operates. Where in the US, it's every man for themselves and, dog eat dog. And that ethos, quite frankly, I could see the trajectory where that was going. And here we are where...
So this was the early 2000s, I imagine, or kind of leading up to the .com bust, I guess, 2001. And was that...
Yeah,
so what was the reason you moved to New Zealand?
Another factor was... Yeah. So 1999, our son was born, and I was looking... We just wanted somewhere more interesting than the Bay Area. And we just felt like, it was kind of, again, just didn't align with our values anymore. And so we went to Canada, Vancouver. Loved Vancouver. But there was no tech industry there. Coincidentally, though, we did meet with, there was a blogger I knew from San Francisco who moved to Vancouver called Katerina Fake. And her boyfriend at the time was Stuart Butterfield. And they were the only tech people, and this is before they were, tech royalty. And so they showed us around Vancouver and were, really advocating Vancouver for us. But they said, look, there is no tech scene here, sorry. And so that kind of took that off the list.
And that was the founder of Slack?
Yeah, founders before that Flickr, and then Slack, yes. So Flickr was there for they did Flickr together, Katerina and Stuart, and so then I had friends some Australian friends, and they kept saying Australia is what you want, mate. Like this is all ticks all the boxes. And then a couple interesting things happened. I looked at the tech scene in Australia, and it was like medieval. It was really just very, very primitive, and it was not inspiring at all. I just felt like this seems like the dark ages in Australia. And then people told me like, well, if your values don't align to the US so much anymore, Australia is just the same, if not worse. Like racism's worse there and, other things. So it may not be what you want. And then New Zealand came up, and I didn't know anything about New Zealand.
You didn't consider the UK?
No. I don't know why. Like, and I'd spent some time in the UK actually. I did a bunch of talks, and we went and presented in Amsterdam as well. Presented the Beastie Boys project, and it didn't really appeal to me. It just didn't. It felt backwards. It felt like going backwards.
Mm-hmm.
And then weather too. Like we were like Bay Area weather was like, let's find somewhere warmer and nicer. And so again, Sydney just can't. Coming up, Sydney. And then 9/11 happened. And all of a sudden there was just a lot more urgency about like, this place is really, and it was really the response to 9/11. Like, let's go bomb those towel heads was the response. And, it was just pretty ugly. And it just felt like, everything was kind of heading in a direction that we just didn't agree with. And so somebody was traveling on their way back to New Zealand, a friend of a friend, and they told us about New Zealand. And we couldn't believe how magic it sounded. It was, they showed us pictures of where they live, and they used to live in the Bay Area. They lived out Stinson Beach, and they were like, the place we have is just like Stinson Beach, but we bought it for, a couple of shekels. And so I was like, that sounds amazing. This sounds too good to be true. There's no chance there's any tech scene. Like if Canada and Australia don't have a tech scene, New Zealand is going to be hopeless. So I went that night, I went online, and it turns out 3 of my heroes were based out of New Zealand. And I didn't know, because it was .co.nz. And that for me was gibberish. It was Mars. It was like, I always thought it was actually, I knew that South Africa was .co with a Z. And so they all blended together to me. Yeah, yeah. And so it's all kind of vague, not a .com, and typical American. So I reached out to these three heroes, like they were doing amazing, amazing work. And
Who were they?
So it was Che Tamahori, who had done amazing work in Director that then evolved into Shockwave. And so it's like he was doing this amazing 3D online, like, the first kind of 3D, high performing 3D interfaces on the internet. There was a guy, Aaron Dustin, who built nzmusic.com and a bunch of other websites. So again, so that really appealed to me, the music angle and doing these beautiful websites. And then there was a guy, Mark Zeman, who did a search engine that was really, really interesting. And so I reached out to Che and I reached out to Dustin, Aaron, and then then I found all these other I was like, okay, maybe these are, the exceptions to the rule. Turns out New Zealand was just doing incredible work. So impressed. Could not believe it. And so I talked to Che. He and we were like long lost brothers. We got on the phone and it was like we'd been, brothers that had been separated. And he said, look, the problem is we get, calls from, you Yanks every once in a while, and then you just waste our time and you never show up. So I said, hang up. I'm going to hang up right now. I'm going to book a flight and I'll call you back once my flight is booked. So I did that. And I think I flew out 2 weeks later. And it was incredible. It was absolutely incredible meeting the people here and seeing the caliber of talent combined with the caliber of humility. I was coming from Silicon Valley. Again, just the .com bubble had burst, but it was still kind of, it was bad, but it wasn't as bad as it was going to get. And so, in Silicon Valley, you have these massive, massive egos, that go along with the talent. And I was finding this talent in New Zealand that was scrappier. Again, my type of talent, like scrappy talent, and without the egos, that's super humble and really boxing above their weight and having no idea. So they were showing me things that they were doing. So I ended up working with Che, and he had an agency called Shift that was doing work that was, again, groundbreaking around the world. So newzealand.com was kind of their marquee customer and their marquee project. And it defined how tourism is operated online. So it set the global template. It was the most innovative, and it set the standard, the gold standard for how tourism is promoted online, and not only for the tourism industry, but for any large programmatically managed CMS managed website. So the way that we did our headers, the way that we designed content, and a lot of this was in place before I even showed up, was absolutely groundbreaking, nothing like it in the world. And so they built their own CMS. Shift was an agency built by designers, so it was a very design led. And so any of the engineering that they did was in service to the design. So the CMS that they built was in service to the design, the layouts. And so they were able to do layouts that nobody had seen before and that, most people thought were not possible with kind of the early technology, the HTML of the time. This is pre-CSS.
Why do you think there was this sort of treasure trove of talent and interesting stuff happening in New Zealand at that time? And you can find
it
that.
It was definitely, again, there is an interesting roots to it. There was a school, Wanganui School of Art, had an amazing design school, an amazing design program that was founded by an American. She went to Cranbrook, and it was modeled after Cranbrook. So Cranbrook was, this, again, kind of this world leading and just a massive talent pool of incredible people that came out of it. And similar, so Wanganui was exactly, so all the people who founded Shift were Wanganui, and everyone they hired was from Wanganui. And
is that still around?
No, that program, I think, that it was kind of a short-lived, I think it was maybe 10 years at most. And it started in the 90s. So it was like, mid 90s to early 2000s. But it spawned a whole generation of talent, just insanely. So I think Aaron came out of that. I'm not sure actually, but Mark Zeman, I'm 90% sure came out of that. Like all the people that I was, that I held in high esteem came out of that program and founded really interesting businesses. And I think it really established, particularly in New Zealand, just like pretty much everywhere, engineering was what kind of people thought of as technology. That, you hire engineers, you hire developers, and that's how you build. That's innovation, actually. And we were, because the internet was such a mass market consumer platform, then all of a sudden design became far more impactful. So, a consumer doesn't give a shit what technology you're running. They just want to be able to do something as fast and as easy as possible. And so all of a sudden, anyone who approached it with a design first strategy had a massive competitive advantage over things that were designed by engineers. So it's just, a kind of eye chart of forms and fields that was, you could see anything that was designed by an engineer. It was just basically a database vomited onto the screen. And it would work, like it would say, no, you are incorrect, and give you no, no advice what to do, how to improve it. And it would maybe not even give you advice about like you did something incorrectly. It would just lead you to believe that you did it. Things like that. So that whole idea of a user experience, the whole idea of making things obvious and have a logic, a design logic, a user experience logic. And that was all kind of emerging. And it wasn't just in New Zealand, it was around the world. But, New Zealand, I think, had just a culture of it, unlike, even in Silicon Valley, I did not see that. Again, engineers were the revered. It was just a culturally driven engineering place. Google, again, famously just engineering led, and we're hostile to design for a long, long time.
So you found that creativity that you really liked in Silicon Valley, and this kind of scrappiness that you liked in the 90s in New Zealand in the early 2000s. And then you decided to stay there and build
so then you
life.
were like, we're going to move?
Well, I hit a similar limit. So with Turntable, I could only do projects of a certain scale. And with Shift and NewZealand.com, it was kind of boring to start, like every project was another website. And it was, and you had to deal with clients and customers, and they were terrible, and they would, undermine their own best interests. And so it was really frustrating. And then just at that time, Flickr launched. And so Flickr was this, again, groundbreaking platform. And actually I was part of because I knew Katerina and Stuart, Flickr came out of a game they built called Game Never Ending. And truth be told, it was a terrible, terrible game. But they had this one feature called the photo shoebox or something like that. And I was like, this feature is fucking amazing. Like, can you please just forget about the game and just do this feature? And I'm sure enough people were giving them that feedback. And that's exactly what they did. So they pivoted that game to build Flickr.
Did you invest in Flickr?
No, I kind of wish I did. I didn't have that kind of investor mindset. No, I did, but I didn't have a kind of angel investor. It was more like I'll work, I want as an employee, to be part of the share option plan. And didn't occur to me to invest in them. And so that all of a sudden gave me the inspiration, like you can build real software on the internet now. That really opened the floodgates. That was Web 2.0 kind of, that was they were the original social network. They were the original Web 2.0 platform, the original SaaS. It was revolutionary that they provided a subscription fee. It was $25 a month or some $20 a month. It was, again, very consumer friendly. And just so many things that they established that, laid the foundation for what we know as SaaS came out of that. And so all of a sudden...
And remind folks who don't know what Flickr is.
So Flickr was a photo sharing platform. And so you would, digital cameras were just a brand new technology at the time. And so people were all of a sudden had just masses and masses of photos that they wanted to share online or share with each other, but they didn't have, and broadband was just kind of starting to emerge. And so that combination of this digital photography and broadband to be able to upload and to be able to view photos online very rapidly was transforming the landscape and what people could do and how they interacted with each other. And so that idea of you would socially share your photos with not just your family and friends, but the world, emerged through Flickr. And so it is the predecessor to Instagram. And, just as I said, so many things came out of that. It wasn't just a photo sharing website. It had a lot more dimensions and depth to it. And so then I was looking at, I want to build a startup. And that was kind of like, I feel ready.
What year was this?
This was 2004,
Okay.
2005. And Gmail had just also launched around the time, so flourish. And that was all, inspiration for all of a sudden we can build actual products and platform to have a distribution. Up until that point, so it was CD-ROMs, and so you had to raise a lot of capital to build something, and it was much riskier where you could build something, very iteratively online, and reach people very, very quickly and build an audience very, very quickly. And so again, YouTube was another, that had launched around that time, and so it was all of a sudden this kind of Web 2.0 emergence of what eventually became SaaS. And so I started developing ideas of, a startup that I wanted to build.
In New Zealand?
What's that?
In New Zealand?
In New Zealand, yes, definitely.
So you guys had moved permanently to New Zealand at that point?
Yeah, we hadn't become citizens at that point, but we were, full-time residents. Yeah, the idea when we moved here was we're going to, move somewhere for 2 years, and it was going to be like an OE. And because our kid was still in nappies, and, we could go anywhere before, we were locked into schools and into, kind of the system. We wanted to have that travel experience, but we fell madly in love with New Zealand. It just was, the first year was a little bit rough. There's things to get adjusted to, and we almost went back, and then we kind of did a road trip around and went up to the Coromandel, and we were just like, we would be the absolute fools to leave this place. And so Wellington, the weather in Wellington leaves a bit to hope for, but so that was a bit of a struggle, because we went from the Bay Area, which was, cold and, temperamental, and it felt like we were just trading up one, the like for like. And
so you moved to Wellington. That was your first. You didn't go to Auckland.
No. Yeah.
Why was that?
Wellington was really the hub of tech. This is where all the design and tech companies were based. There were a handful out of Auckland, but not much. It wasn't really. It's since emerged as kind of much more of the tech center, but at the time, Wellington really was. And so I started putting together plans for a startup, and started figuring out, like, how do I raise money? How do I build a team? How do I, what do I do? How does one, especially in New Zealand?
Did you have an idea already or no?
I was working on an idea. And so the idea that emerged was a peer-to-peer education platform I had young kids at the time. And so I felt that they actually are the best way to learn from each other was peer-to-peer. And that the whole idea of peer-to-peer was kind of emerging. So I put together, I started researching, like, who would, what kind of team and who would I find and how would I do this? And is there any mentors that I could find? There really wasn't, like, there was, Trade Me was the only thing in New Zealand that was, a startup. Everything, there was, nothing else really here was a startup. There was agencies, and then there were these, like, big dev houses, that worked for government, there was no startups. And, however, I found this blogger that was very aligned in my field, really inspiring, and I just was thinking all the things I was thinking, saying all the things I was, thinking, and, just was really, his understanding of technology, of business, of strategy was super impressive, unlike anyone I'd ever seen in New Zealand. Oh. And so I reached out to him.
Who was that?
So that was Rod Drury. And so I reached out to him and I said, I have this idea. I'd love to talk to you about it. We had lunch together, and it was just this, like, magic, we're just finishing each other's sentences and, just vibing very deeply. And it was really inspiring. And so he said, look, why don't you, put together a pitch deck, and, I'll help you. Like, he said, what you're talking about is a consumer product not really my thing, but I'll help you. I'm a B2B guy. And
What was he doing at the time?
he was doing Aftermail.
Which was
Aftermail was like I forget, a way of storing email. It was an email platform that sold to a US company. I forget what it did. And he built it to flip it. Like, from the day he founded that, it was his intention to sell it off. And I think I think when we met, he was in the process of selling it, or maybe he had just sold it. I can't remember. And so he said, yeah, put together a pitch deck and I'll help you, raise some money and get the thing off the ground. And so I put a pitch deck together and I met him and pitched him, and he was like, whoa, this is amazing. And he's like, so what do you do? You're a designer? And okay.
Wait, so what was the idea exactly? Peer-to-peer tutoring?
Yeah, it was peer-to-peer learning. So it was like a video platform. It's basically like, the kids use it now, YouTube this way.
Yeah.
So how to, like, here's a tutorial on blah, blah, blah. But it was just, the idea was that, and so YouTube really didn't exist, and it was a bunch of meme videos at the time, cat videos and stuff.
It still is.
Yeah, exactly true. It still is. Yeah. And so Structables is kind of,
Like WikiHow or something as well.
Yeah, things like that. That was kind of, I just saw how my kids were interacting and how and how school was kind of failing them, and that they were learning from each other so much faster. And I wanted to accelerate that and make it fun for them. And so when I pitched Rod, he was like, yeah, this is really cool. I've got a pitch for you. Web 2.0 accounting. And I was like, yep, I totally get it, because that was the one thing that was really daunting me was the finance side and managing the finances in particular, because I'd worked with QuickBooks and I'd worked with MYOB, and both of them were a nightmare, and it just made everything painful, and it made it really hard to know how the business is performing. And so, as soon as he said it, I was like, yeah, that makes total sense to me. I said, the idea of APIs was just kind of emerging, and I'd read an awesome paper, and I can't remember the guy who wrote it, but he was Tom Coates, that's who wrote it. He was ex-Flickr, and he wrote this kind of manifesto about network services, or what eventually became kind of APIs and microservices. And I was like, we will need, to really make this fly, we will need a connection to the bank data to download and import banks, and banks are just notoriously bad to deal with. And Rod was like, this is New Zealand, mate, I can have meetings with the banks tomorrow if you want. So that was pretty awesome. And I think that that's one of the things about that made this special about building, there was a number of factors about building this in New Zealand, creating Xero in New Zealand. But, having that access to the banks was something that, you couldn't do in a lot of other places. And so, my thinking was, I'll do this. This will be a great way to build an accounting system that I'll actually know how to use and that will serve me. So I'm building it for myself, basically. And then in 2 years, I'll, go do the startup that I actually, originally wanted to do. But then, of course, 2 years came around and it was just way too much fun building Xero. And so, I stuck around for 10 years.
What were the early days in Xero? I guess super scrappy. And then, building it out of New Zealand, what was your experience in terms of kind of raising capital, getting access, all of that?
Yeah, so it was interesting because Rod, had a very tech background. He came out of the Microsoft kind of school of building businesses and building technology, which is very engineering led, where I was more of an Apple guy. But he was starting to become an Apple guy, and it was weirdly I was becoming a Windows guy, because
you were becoming a Windows guy.
Yeah, I was becoming a Windows guy because Apple was, at the time, it was like System 10 or whatever, X, and it was just an abomination of
Is that when John Scully was there?
From hell. What's that? OS X, yeah. And so Rod had, he loved the hardware, the Apple hardware. And so it was ironic that we were kind of trading places a little bit. And so, but yeah, his orientation is all about engineering and tech. And so, and the CTO, so that was the early team, was Rod and Hamish. Kind of, they'd been kind of brewing up the idea for a while. Hamish was his accountant. And then the original team was Rod, Hamish, Craig, who was a CTO, me, and Fletch was another engineer on the team early days. And so, my approach to it was to go out and to interview people and to understand, all right, what does a small business need? What does an accountant need? Who are the players? What are all the moving parts? What is the lay of the land? That's my process as a designer, is just to study this first and do kind of a survey of the landscape. And Craig was already coding things. And I was like, how are you coding anything? We haven't even figured out what we're doing.
Yeah.
And he's like, a double entry ledger. It's like there's some just, kind of fundamentals that we can, start building out. And I was like, okay. And so I would go out and interview these people. And the first several weeks we're doing this. And I'd come back and I'd put sticky notes up on the wall. And like, so, okay, apparently you need invoices. And, there was some things I already knew, like invoices and this, but I didn't know about certain reports. Like there's a, fixed asset and, other things that are kind of, and, journaling, the whole idea of a journal and, double entry. And so getting into the inner workings of it. And so every time I'd come back after an interview, I'd kind of, whatever my learnings for the day, I'd put up on the wall. And then after about, a week or two of this, Rod and Craig were looking at me like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, you're supposed to be making pretty screens. Like, no. Like, this is, we don't even know what we're building yet. And they were like, it's an accounting system. I'm like, so you just want to build a knockoff accounting system like everyone else has? Like, what are we going to do that's interesting and different here? If this is online, what advantages, how can we take advantage of that? And so I looped them into, they were furious with me, and they really were like, I got very evil stares from them. And then I looped them into it.
I'm surprised they didn't understand the importance of design, given they said they're Mac users and Apple users.
Yeah, no, I think that they came from this school where, the Microsoft school, where it's all just engineers. You just build. And I think it was, I'm a part of the early team because they knew that there was something, design had a place in this world, but they'd never worked with a designer. Let's put it that way. So they had, they'd worked with a designer a little bit, but not kind of how I would just describe it. Again, with somebody who made pixels, through screens.
And I'm sure that there's also because you were the only American on the team, right? So
sorry.
You're the only American on the team?
Yes. And not for very long, actually. We hired some Americans,
But at the time, it's you're kind of like a foreigner, and you're trying to introduce different ideas. And was that...
Well, they'd worked with each other before, so they were this unit already. And I was the weirdo, the misfit, that was, again, challenging them. Like, Rod doesn't love people challenging him. And I was just like, no, this is how I'm doing it. But then I got them involved in doing the sticky notes. And all of a sudden, they changed they were like, oh, no. This goes here. This, these things are aligned to this. And we kind of started putting these conceptual groups together. And then all of a sudden, Craig, this went on for another week or so. And he was like, I have to throw away my data schema, the whole database. This is the data schema up on the wall. These sticky notes. This has re-architected the whole thing. I'm throwing it all away. And
you were like, I told you so?
No, but I was grateful. I was like, thank God. Because it really did. It fundamentally changed, the entire orientation of how we architected and built things.
So what exactly were you doing with these sticky notes, with the interviews that what were you doing? And then why was it so, I guess, insightful for them that they came aboard?
So I was, what are the moving parts? So there's invoices basically, and then started mapping out. There's inputs and then outputs. So there's, money that's coming in, and then you have to organize that money and make some sense of it. And then what do you do on the other side of it? And who are the players? So there's a bookkeeper, there's an accountant, but there's, there's staff, there's suppliers, there's vendors that you deal with. So who's involved in this? What is their role in it? And then the other really, really fundamental thing, this was something that, again, I just kind of, as I was gathering this information, I really wanted to put it on a timeline. I was like, so what do you do on a daily basis? What do you do on a weekly basis? What do you do on a monthly basis? What do you do on a quarterly, annually? Because I realized that there's cycles, and there's, especially with business and taxes, that these things happen in very kind of
predictable cycles.
Yeah, defined cycles, and that there's different activities inside those cycles. And so that was a huge, huge eye opener, understanding that. And so Rod I think his first job and, his career was working at Ernst & Young. He has an accountant background. So he was, and Hamish was an accountant. So they were providing all this insight and input too. And then, yeah, just those kind of logical groupings and also figuring out where the holes are, where the gaps are. And then the next step we did was, okay, we need to have this in market in, 6 to 9 months. So, we've mapped out an entire universe, like a roadmap that would last 100 years. What are we actually going to ship for version 1? And so we ran around with, dots, red dot, green dot, yellow dot. Yellow is like maybe. And so there's apparently an acronym, Moscow, that emerged later on about this. So we were just like, we're not doing this. We're not, just strip it back, all the things we're not doing. And then my next step was to figure out what is kind of the building block, the fundamental core unit that kind of defines the entire workflow. And so I started off designing invoices that was kind of a core unit. But then two things kind of emerged out of those sessions. So I'd meet, like I said, I'd meet with business owners, small business owners, medium, large, and then with accountants and bookkeepers, kind of everyone, suppliers, vendors, and understand their perspective and their part of the equation. And what quickly emerged was that cash is king. And, that's not a grand insight, but some important insights came out of that, and important revelations. So, a small business in particular lives or dies on cash flow. Like big businesses can kind of absorb it and kind of, borrow money and shift things around. And small businesses, can't do that. And so what's the cash flow visibility in an accounting system or in this whole, not even an accounting system, process in this workflow? And realized that actually there's no visibility. Like, so that this was this thing that kept coming up that particularly accountants and bookkeepers would say, well, the problem, and so there was a couple things that, immediately, again, from my experience, kind of running my own business, working with accountants and bookkeepers and running a business was, again, I just had no visibility of my cash flow in that really. And it was just this mystery thing where you just throw it over the fence and they do. And then you have to pay taxes. And so everything is painful about that. Like I have this shoebox full of receipts and, I have to pay somebody to deal with it. And in return, I have to then pay somebody, the tax man to for the pleasure. And, so that seemed insane. Like none of these accounting systems were helping me run my business. They were helping me pay taxes. And that's not why I'm in business. And then the accountants were saying like, well, I also knew that the relationship with my accountant in my history was, again, a tense relationship. Like, it's like these fuckers, they're quite honestly not the most personable people. And they're like lawyers. They're like, we're just going to gouge you and extort you and, you're at our mercy. And I just felt like there needs to be, I understand the value of an accountant, but I think it needs to be a much more collaborative. And now with the internet, we can build in a collaborative process, collaborative workflow. And so that was really fun. But where like MYOB, literally their selling point was do your own business. Like fuck the accountant, you don't need them. And so, we had a very different perspective that no, you actually want an expert involved. You do not want to wing this. And, there is a level of knowledge and expertise you just don't have and you should never have. But you do want to have, get more value out of that relationship. So that was kind of an important conceptual idea. And so it's collaborative and it's about cash flow. And so then all of a sudden I locked in on bank reconciliations being this, that's where all of these things meet, all roads meet through the bank reconciliation. And, so I, realized that the way a bank reconciliation works conventionally is that the bank sends you a paper statement at the end of the month, not even at the end of the month, like 2 weeks after the end of the month. And then you have to go through and, hand write down this was for that and that was for this. And then talking to accountants and bookkeepers and knowing my own experience, nobody does that. As soon as they get the statement at the end of the month, they just put it on the pile on their desk or in the drawer and, hope it goes away. And, so most people weren't doing that bank reconciliation until the accountant was saying, hey, you're about to go to jail if you don't do this. So at the end of the year, when most people did it, and so it gives them no visibility on their cash flow there, and it's this extraordinarily painful process because they don't know what this was, what did I spend this on? Where was this? Why was this? Who was this? None of it. And so they're just kind of making shit up. And again, it doesn't help them run their business. It's all old, it's like, great. It just tells me that I ran my business into the ground. That's all this I can get from this, and that I owe the IRS or the IRD money. And so, I came back to that, like, this idea I had in my first meeting with Rod, that, this bank data, getting that in real time is a game changer here. And how can we do that? And so I came up with an interface, and I created a prototype. Again, just scrappy. Here's an idea. And it was interesting. We actually had a meeting with, I think it was Ernst & Young or one of the Deloitte, one of those, the four. And when we showed them the prototype, they thought it was the real product. They were like, wow, okay, so can we start using this today? And I was like, no. I kept explaining, no, this is fake. None of this works. And they were like, I saw it on screen. It works. It's like, no. So I designed a idea. One of the things that I really, in this idea of around doing something collaborative design, again, I wanted to make it fun, that going into accounting just sounded like the worst, most dry, horrible thing. How do we turn this into fun? Like, I need this to be fun for me to build. And I want, like, if we can make accounting fun, that would be absolutely revolutionary. And look, games, so many video games and so many board games. Monopoly, the biggest game in the world, is all about money. So people love playing with money. And so how do we bring some of that into this? And I was lucky to have young kids at the time. And so our favorite game to play together was Lego Star Wars, which is this highly collaborative game. And so there's these handoff points where you have to
a video game or what?
Video game, yeah, Sony PlayStation at the time. And so, you have to hand off to each other and solve puzzles. And so it had this real collaborative element that was an inspiration. But an even simpler inspiration was playing the game of memory with my 3-year-old. He was 3 at the time. And so the game is like, you have a deck of cards, and these kind of pictures on the cards, and there's pairs. Mm-hmm. So there's dog, dog, cat, cat, and you flip the pile over, and then you have to find matching. Yeah. So if you flip over a dog and then you flip over a cat, you kind of remember, okay, there's the dog, there's the cat. Now when I flip over the dog, I know, okay, these two match. I'm flipping them over and taking them off the deck and putting them in the pile. And playing this game with my son, I realized this is a very addictive game. Once you start, you can't stop. Like, we are wired for pattern matching. Our brains are just like dopamine, dopamine, dopamine. Every time and it's because it's so easy. It's like, oh, I can do this. Like, there's no, and, getting that matching pair again is this dopamine hit. And I realized we're doing a bank reconciliation, that there's a transaction that's in my records that I need to match up with a record in the bank's transactions. And once I match those up, then I take it off the pile, and that's done. And so then I, designed up an interface that represented that concept. And I was really, really happy with it. And I showed it to Craig and Rod, and I was expecting them to just, like, again, throw me out the window. And they were actually, I was surprised. They were like, wow, this is really cool. This is, this is very game, this is really fun looking. And, but will it work? Will people use it, and does it do what it, what we need it to do? And I was like, well, this is why we do user testing. And so I don't know. It could be a complete, nobody understands it, nobody gets it, and it doesn't do what we want it to do. So fortunately, at the time we were in a tiny little apartment, and it was quite a sweatbox, scrappy again.
Meaning you were working out of a small apartment. You don't have an office.
No.
So did you guys just rent an apartment just to work out of? Like, that was your sort of homemade office?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's this apartment 404, and so
in Wellington somewhere.
Apartment Not Found was one of the early database schema names that Craig came up with for that. And so we brought people in, and I had about 6 people lined up to come in. And so fortunately, because we were in a tiny little apartment, everybody was in the room when I did this user testing. And so the first person came in, and I, this is kind of my standard practice for doing user testing. I have a prototype. I put them in front of it. I try to tell them as little as possible and just wait and see, wait very uncomfortably. And so the instructions I give them is, here's the premise. You need to do a bank reconciliation. So I give them just the vaguest kind of core concept. And then I say, tell me everything that you see on screen. Tell me what you want to do and tell me what you expect to happen when you do it. So I want to get inside their heads. That's the whole purpose, is like, do they see this and understand this the way that we hope? Or do they see it somehow completely differently? And so we went through the process and, so the first woman was like, yeah, so it's a, bank reconciliation. I see here's my checking account. Here's my savings account. So I would, want to do my checking account. That's the most important account. So I'll reconcile that first. So I want to click on that. Okay, cool. So what's going to happen when you click on that? So then that's when I have to go find my statement from the bank and, oh my God, look at the time here. I have to go. And so got really, twitchy and just uncomfortable immediately, like just was very agitated. And I said, just hang in there a couple minutes, we'll be through this really quickly. And so then I said, all right, now click on that button. And she clicked on the button. She's like, this is not what I expected. And, so then she was talking out loud and she said, it says upload your statement. And she's like, oh, I didn't know you can upload my statement. How do I do that? And then it had an instruction, go here and get your statement. And she was like, so I just upload my statement and it.
Wait, so this was, and she was doing this on her live data? You didn't give her demo data?
No, again, this is a prototype. So this is all faked up.
Okay.
This is all fake.
Okay.
It's just, I did it in Flash.
Okay.
So it's basically, you could do it in, other people use like PowerPoint. So it's like screen.
Got it.
So
it's like the Figma, like the equivalent of like a Figma mockup that you can like.
Yes, exactly. A Figma mockup. Yeah. So, but it was like a slideshow. It was as if you were standing over somebody's shoulder using the software.
Got it. Okay.
That's the whole idea, is that you're going through a sequence.
Okay.
And so if there was something where they said, like, I expect to do this, and that's not what the next screen is, then you write that down and you're like, okay, first of all, they're not doing the thing you want them. So how do you guide people to do the thing? And then, oh, interesting, they were expecting this other thing. I didn't even think of that. Like, here's an opportunity for us to do something, that I hadn't even thought of. So we get to the screen where, you have to upload your statement. She's like, cool. Okay. Then I'll click this button. So, okay, what will happen? And she says, all right, well, so then probably we'll load my statement. And then I have to like write in, the transactions, and I have to write it all down and everything. I was like, cool. And again, I'm not saying, all I'm saying is, what do you expect now? And so then she clicks the button and it came up with what's still fundamentally the same interface, where it has transactions in your records, in your accounting system on one side, and then on the other side, the transactions from the bank. And it's automatically matched up ones that it can make a match for. And so she looked at that and she was like, oh, this is not what I expected. And she, talking out loud, and she said, so I think it automatically matched this for me. Like, and then she looked at me and said, is that what happened? Is this? And I said, I can't say anything. You tell me what happened. And she's like, no, that's what it looks like. It looks like it matched it up. And if I click the OK button, I'm done. And I said, okay, that's what you expect to happen? And she clicked the OK button and poof, the transaction was reconciled. She literally had to click one button and basically her cash flow is done. And so she was absolutely gobsmacked and, really excited about what we're doing and was asking all kinds of questions. So, we went through a few more things, and just the kind of intensity of her response was really amazing. And she's like, I want to sign up. Can I sign up for this now? And how much is it going to cost? So then we asked, how much would you pay? And she said somewhere in the neighborhood of $150. And we were like, so we did say it's going to be a monthly fee. Yeah. And she was like, yeah, $150 easy. I have no problem. And we were like, Jesus, wow, that's a lot more than we had thought. And so she left. And so Rod and Craig were in the room. And I was like, we were all looking at each other like, whoa, that was crazy. And I said, maybe lucky first, like, we have more people coming. Yeah. That we probably just got lucky and we're going to, hit a wall here on the next one. Brought the next person in, exactly the same reaction. I think they said they were willing to pay $500 a month. It was just bonkers. And so we were really just like, holy shit, we're really onto something. So literally everyone said, when can I sign up? And, and I'll pay, crazy money for this. And so we did 6 people like that. And then we sat around after it was all done and we were all just kind of amazed and stunned. And so I thought it was pretty obvious this is what we're building. And both of them were like, yeah, maybe one day we'll build this, but this is, it's cute. You made these pictures that people really get excited about, but we actually have to engineer and build this. And that's not a minor undertaking. Like, it's cool that you can design something like this, but building it is a whole other thing. And said, well, you do know I know how to code, and like I have some ideas about how I'd engineer this. And again, did not give me any favors. It was just like they wanted to punch me in the face. And basically they said, no, you have to go back to the drawing board, build something, you design something that we can build in the time frame that we have. Because otherwise we're just going to build a bank reconciliation platform. And so I ended up, doing a new prototype, and it was, this time you did have to get the paper statement, and it was all the conventional things, because that's really was the only alternative if we wanted to get it done in the time frame we had. And so again, brought users in, did user testing, and they were all at that point, they were all agitated, and they were like, oh, I need to go pick up my kid at soccer. And we were like, hang in there. And then we got to the part with the statement. They were like, oh, I don't have my statement. I guess I have to go now. And we're like, here's a piece of paper, just use this as your statement. And then they were just squirming in their seats, wanting to get away as fast as possible. Not a single one of them said, can I sign up for this? When will it be available? I'd like to, I'll pay.
These were different people, right?
Different people. So 6 people we brought in for the first test, and then 6 people for the next test. And, so I had my mind made up about which one we're building. And fortunately so that was a really defining moment where design again was, we don't do anything until we design it. So design is the first step in the process. And really that means user research is the first step in the process. And then we do design. And so literally everything at Xero was, we went through the design process first long before an engineer touched it. Mm-hmm. And that was radical at the time. Was an enormous, arguably our biggest competitive advantage was that we were design led. And so that gave us this massive advantage. And the technology to build it actually wasn't that hard. Mm-hmm. Like it was like my brother you mentioned earlier. I just had to nudge them and say, like, here's how I would pattern match these things. Like there's a date, there's an amount, and it's kind of, what we would call machine learning these days. It is just, this is what computers are good at. Just match a few things.
You have listened to the first of 2 parts of the episode with Philip. We will release the second part very soon, so don't forget to hit the bell to stay updated on all our news. Thank you for tuning in to TechMates. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with friends. We'll be back soon with more stories of Kiwi and Aussie founders reshaping the future and disrupting down under. Until next time, keep dreaming big and daring to disrupt.